So we are finishing off our 4-week series today on idols. Week 1, we covered the topic of money. Week 2, the topic of power. Last week, the subject of sex. And today we're going to finish off speaking about busyness. It's a pretty apt day to speak about it when so many parents bring their children forward, because that's one busy season of life. If you consider nature, there's an amazing rhythm to nature, kind of a stateliness. Sunrise happens, a day goes, sunset is followed by the night. You've got the new moon, through to the full moon, then back to the new moon again. Just the shift every month of the lunar cycle. Winter gives way to spring, which in due course gives way to summer, and then again autumn. Similar time every single year as the earth carries on its journey around the sun, once every 365 and a quarter days approximately. Animals give birth, raise their young, graze, usually in a leisurely fashion, lest they're being hunted. In a brief burst of getting away or being caught, the cycle of life continues in nature. Trees stand still, receiving water, receiving the rain, waving their branches in the wind. Occasional storms and rain, thunder and lightning and cloud give way to sunshine again. And the cycle of life and the cycle of nature continues. The sun sets and the sun rises. Another day begins. There is one anomaly. And that's us. It's mankind. If you were to arrive as an alien in this planet and observe with the sound turned off, I don't know if you've ever watched any form of television or movies with the sound off and you don't know exactly what's happening, you just see the actions, and you were to kind of helicopter out above any city, it's just this franticness. The sun rises and the sun sets, autumn gives way to winter, gives way to spring. Humans. You watch these speeded up videos of nature. It's just kind of the stateliness, the seasons, the sunrise and sunset just going. Even when it's sped up, it looks calm. But anything that's sped up of what humans do, it's just frantic. We're often frantically running around, wearing busyness as a badge of honor. I came across this phrase, which I didn't know somebody had coined a phrase like this, but it was busy bragging. A guy named Tim Creeder said this. He says, moaning about how busy you are is pretty obviously a boast disguised as a complaint. This was in The Guardian. And then he gives him a reason for why we busy brag about our lives. And this is his reason. He says, your life cannot possibly be silly or trivial or meaningless if you are so busy, completely booked, in demand every hour of the day. I came across another blogger who posed the reverse question. She said, imagine with me that someone asks you, how are you doing? And you reply, I'm doing well. I don't have a lot going on. Is that an acceptable answer? She asks. If you answer like that, will people think you are lazy? If we don't claim to be busy, will people think we have no ambition and no goals in life? I tell you, this subject is a constant mirror for me. It's a constant giant for me personally. All that needs to be done, that I want to do, collides with my own mind and brain, all going on all the time. Phil said to me the other day, he said, as our boys have now grown older, Ethan's about to start high school, so next year they'll be in grade 10 and grade 8. He said, in some ways your life has just got back a little bit of normal feel after the junior school energy spend. And then we feel God speak to us about 10 weeks ago about adopting a little girl. and she's going to be starting school at some point, right at the beginning. She's 6 years old. And Phil said to me, it's like you've willingly chosen to jump into chaos at a far deeper level. Thanks, Phil, for putting it so accurately. I'd like to distinguish using this slide that I've put together. I borrowed some ideas, but this is my colors. We've got to distinguish between these three different zones, and I want to make it clear of what I'm talking about today. So, on the blue side of this is idleness. If you are a lazy person, if you are idle, I don't think you're going to get anything out of today's message. The Bible's got a lot of verses about it, but today we're not talking about your affliction. We were designed to live in the green zone. We were designed to be productive. We were designed actually to work. Before sin entered the world, God said to Adam and Eve, work the garden. So work is not sinful. It's not a bad thing. Productive work, in fact, is very good for us. It's very good for our psyche, for our being, to be productively involved. The red zone is where we start to feel overwhelmed and anxious, and this is where our mental, physical performance starts to dip off again. We're talking about the idol of living down here in the red zone. Now, over busyness. I've put these words up on the screen, because if you want to write something down, hopefully there'll be a few things, but this would be one of them, is over busyness. The problem of over busyness is primarily a feeling or a mindset. You can be very productively busy and still be at peace in your heart and mind. I'm guessing together with me, most of us have experienced that, where there's lots on the go, but the peace and the tranquility is at a soul level. We're managing with all those things. It's also possible that you don't have much on and yet feel harassed and overwhelmed in your thoughts. So in other words, overbusyness does not have as much to do with our calendars as it does have to do with our state of mind. I'm speaking to the right group of people this morning, or is it just me that occasionally lives, more than occasionally, with this feeling of being harassed, overwhelmed, feeling overbusy? At the beginning of the series, we borrowed a quote from Augustine, way back in the 4th century, who said that the essence of sin is disordered love. And the problem with us as humans is when we start living in the zone of feeling and thinking overbusy, when we start to feel overwhelmed, it's at that time that usually we're in the greatest danger of having disordered love. When we're feeling overwhelmed, when we're feeling frantic in our thoughts and in our hearts, our mind, our emotions, it's then that we start switching chairs to kind of just cope, and generally we move back into the ultimate chair, referencing an analogy I've used in previous weeks. And it's of great importance to all of us for our well-functioning, for our correct connection with God, for our life in this world. We get such a short gift of life. It's finite. Every one of us has a day of birth, and in the future we'll have a day of death. And in that time, this gift from God, I don't know how to put this strongly, if we owe it to ourselves, we ought to live lives that aren't frantic, that aren't overwhelmed in thinking, in our headspace, and yet it's so easy to get there and make that our address. I'd like to suggest 5 reasons that a mindset of overbusyness sometimes happens. There might be more, but I'd like to suggest 5 today. And then I'd like to suggest one solution and use a Bible text to work around the solution a little bit. And I reckon we should finish with that same song. Andy, music team, Bella, that last song, It Is Well With My Soul. I just had that idea when we were singing it. A mindset of overbusyness often comes through one or more of these 5 things, but firstly is a low-level sense of guilt for all the things I feel I should be doing but am not doing. A guy named Leo Babauta, who has authored a book around this idea, he says, we know it well, the feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it all. This is true not only of work, where we have too many projects. I beg your pardon, meetings, emails, admin tasks, calls, requests, messages, but also of our personal lives. We want to exercise, eat well, meditate, learn something cool, travel, go out with friends, spend time in solitude, go for hikes, read 1 million books, take care of finances and errands, keep up with podcasts and news and interesting online content, and our loved ones on social networks and fascinating people on social media. Beg your pardon. While finding space for contemplation and quiet. Phew. I don't know if Leo has any children, but he doesn't mention parenting once in there. And if you are currently raising children, that list is even longer. Low-level guilt, sometimes it's high-level, but very often low-level sense of guilt that we live thinking, well, I should be doing all of these different things, and if I do this thing, I've got an opportunity cost because I can't also be doing that thing simultaneously. So we live with this rush in our brain, thinking I've got to frantically chase every single second to live a successful life. The second reason that I think a mindset of over-busyness often happens is through comparison. If Leo's list applies to any part of that applies to you just within your natural self, then you start comparing your life to anybody else, and you think, oh boy, they're doing that. Man alive, look at the holidays they take, so I try and fit in extra holidays to copy that person in. Look what they do in their spare time, and I try and fit that in, and I borrow everybody else's over-busyness to overflow my own bucket. This enemy of comparison is a very subtle thing. And often it happens in the area of our own personal insecurities. We're completely secure within ourselves, and I doubt any one of us could claim that title absolutely. But if we're completely secure, we can celebrate what other people are doing and say, that's fantastic. But I'm in my lane. But in the areas of my own insecurities, I start comparing myself to others and think, well, if I want to be like them, I should be doing more of what they're doing. And in an unhelpful way, I start to drift lanes, become a hazard on the freeway. Somehow thinking that adding more activity somehow equals success in God's eyes. The third reason that the mindset of over-busyness happens to many of us is poor planning. Don't blame God or the devil, it's just poor planning on my part. I don't know about you, but if I look back over various busy weeks, some of the best time I often spend in a week is time spent planning how I'm going to spend the rest of my time in that week. When I'm too rushed to plan, I very often do things the long way around. And so we fail to plan well. And suddenly lots of little things start to eat up bigger chunks of time, and then we feel more and more rushed and frantic with the big things we knew we should have done, the good things we should have done, and didn't get to because of the distraction of 1,000 little things. Fourth reason this mindset of over-busyness develops is the lack of self-reflection. Self-reflection is a habit that tries to helicopter out and look back in on my own world and ask myself this question: what should I be doing and what should I leave out? And why am I doing what I'm doing? All the little tasks that are in my world, all the thousands of ideas running through in my brain, what should I be doing and what should I leave out? And this idea of self-reflection is one that is quite difficult to do, to practice, if you're in a mindset of over-busyness. Because you think to yourself, what is the point of self-reflecting? I have no time. Well, I don't feel I have any time. But actually pausing and asking the questions about the why and the what help slow down the pace of my mind, focus on what's important for now. And there's some things that I can't do as a result, and I can live comfortable with those if I've reflected on the what and the why. One of the things that has really helped me in this idea of self-reflection is to move from a mindset that says, I have to do something. How many of you occasionally say that mentally or out loud? Thank you, one honest person. Actually, I wasn't asking you to necessarily to raise your hands, but thank you, Joe. Moving from mindset of, I have to. Why are you doing that? Well, I have to go and do. From that phrase, moving to this phrase of saying, I chose to or I choose to. Moving from I have to I chose to. There have been some weeks in my vocation as a pastor in this local church, many of them, where I felt overwhelmed and felt overbusy. Sometimes I've thought escapist type thoughts that go along these lines. Imagine how amazing it would be to just one day be able to sit feet up on the beach somewhere just fishing indefinitely. Just not another email or phone call, just chilling. Now I have two thoughts that immediately follow that very pleasant idea. Is one, you'd be bored within 2 days. Down on this idleness, I'd be way back in the blue zone. But the second thing that I try and self-talk to myself is, you chose this. Nobody forced you. Of course, you were trying to obey God, but you chose everything that you're doing. You jumped in. And so if this is where God's called you to jump in, now, how do you manage this feeling of overbusyness? So this is a very autobiographical message. Often it's through lack of self-reflection. And then pause, say, what should I be doing? What can others do? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And how can I move from I have to do anything to I choose to, or I chose to do that thing? Moses in Psalm 90 writes this. He says, so teach us to number our days aright, that we may get a heart of wisdom. God, help me to number my days, to look at them. I need a heart of wisdom to accurately use the time that you've given me. And the fifth and probably biggest reason that we get a mindset of overbusyness is a lack of faith. A lack of faith, meaning that we don't truly believe at various points in our week or month that God is in control of the world and in control of our lives. If we fully trusted Him, chances are we'd live a lot more restful in our thoughts, a lot less frantic. Now, this is a major challenge, this last one, for every one of us, and I include myself. There's a fascinating story in the Old Testament. The people of Israel were traveling en masse for many years in the desert with literally no food there. And every morning, supernaturally, God provided a food substance that was on the ground called manna. When they woke up, God's supernatural provision from heaven was there on the ground every single day. And God gave strict instructions for the collection of this manna. There was enough for everybody. It says those who collected too little had enough. Those who collected too much had enough. And God gave them this instruction, collect for 6 days, and on the 6th day, whatever you collect there, will keep for the 7th. Everything you collected on these days would go rotten the next day, but whatever you collect on the 6th would stay fine for the 7th day. And then in Numbers, it tells the story. It says, so the people went out and collected every day, but on the 7th day, when they shouldn't have been collecting, it says some of the people went out and collected, and there was nothing. The provision on the 6 days was there to last the 7. And God says this to Moses. He says, how long do you, the people, refuse to keep my commands? In other words, how long do you choose to not have faith that my provision with your 6 days of collection will cover your 7 days of appetite? And this really challenges me because I find myself often frantically with my own human effort thinking, well, if God doesn't provide, I just need to be there just in case. Rowing my own boat instead of hoisting the sail and say, God, thank you for your wind that carries me forward in the same direction with a lot less of my effort. Now, my antidote this morning is not to rattle off a long list of to-dos to add to your task list. But I'd like to suggest, and there's a number of different things we can do to manage all of this noise that goes on in our heads, but I'd like to suggest that the number one thing that the Bible and God calls each of us to do when we are overly busy in our minds is to refocus our mind on God so that the wheel of our life stays well centered. I'd like to use a picture to try and illustrate this, a picture of a bicycle wheel. If the center of those spokes, if the middle of the wheel is slightly off balance, it's a slightly off center, that wheel doesn't go well. A bicycle is designed to be ridden on a perfectly circular wheel. And if for some reason the center moves a little bit and it gets a bit oblong, that ain't a comfortable ride. I know this from experience. But before I tell my story about that, let me show you this beautiful Bible verse from Isaiah 26. I'm reading from the ESV. God promises, Isaiah says this about God, you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. So this is a promise from God. Take any one of us when we feel over busy and frantic. God's promise is if you keep your mind stayed on me, if you center your world around me, then all the spokes of everything you have to get done will be kept in perfect peace. There's a tension, the right amount of tension will exist in your life, that your life will have momentum and will roll forward as long as you're keeping your mind stayed on me. This is much easier said than done, but this is the promise. Keep your mind stayed on me, I'll keep your life in perfect peace, or using my analogy, perfectly centered. When I was a youngster, maybe 10 or 11 years old, I'd fix various punctures on my bicycle. I loved riding my bike. And then one day I noticed that all the spokes in the wheel had this little goodies at the end of them. And so I got a little shifting spanner. I started to shift those and realized for the first time ever that those spokes are actually screwed in and held in tension. And with this great discovery, I started to fiddle with all of the different, whatever those screwed in bits are that hold the spoke tight. Being no expert at all in bicycles, I then proceeded to adjust my spoke tension. And what happened is that wheel started to go out of alignment. So as you spun the wheel, you'd have this bloop, 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 bloop like that. I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to get it back straight and failed miserably. That bicycle was never the same again. Now, if you took it in, of course, to a bike shop and there was an expert bike spoke tensioner, he would get that thing lined up. But I ain't one of those people. I don't know about now. I haven't tried this in recent times. But it's a beautiful picture of what happens when I'm so busy trying to adjust the spokes of my life that the center gets slightly off balance. That wheel starts to run slightly wobbly. And then the brakes don't work that well. And it gets worse at higher speeds. So at low speeds, my wobbly wheel doesn't matter too much. And then the pace picks up of my over busyness and things that need to be done, etc. And suddenly that wheel starts to wobble. And we can have catastrophic wipeouts. And we're moaning about all the bruises and the bleeding. But actually, if we retrace our steps, it was because the wheel went out of alignment. Because we stopped keeping our mind fixed on our Father, on Christ, who He's the center. He should be the center. Anything else on the center means it's an oval wheel, and the wobble is horrible at high speeds. There are various verses in the Bible that, for me, are recentering passages. It's like when I read them, the Bible is the Word of God. And when I read them, it's like the spanners of heaven start to adjust the tension just very slightly in different spokes of my life, helping that wheel come into alignment again. And one of my favorite recentering passages is Psalm 23. And so I'd like to read through Psalm 23 in a devotional way, drawing a couple of ideas out of it that help us recenter and keep our minds fixed on Him. I'm going to read the whole Psalm through, then come back and touch on a few points. David writes this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely, goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. There have been times, particularly when the wheel of overbusy thinking has wobbled my world a little bit, where I've sat with the psalm and literally wept tears as Christ brings some retensioning into my heart and into my soul. Let's start with line 1. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. If you just take the words in that sentence, the Lord, God, who made the heavens and the earth, who controls everything, who made the stars with the word from his mouth, the Lord. That's a big phrase. That's huge. That's God himself. The Lord is my. The next word that stands out to me. It's an incredible personal link that David has with the God of the universe. The Lord is my shepherd. It's interesting when Jesus taught us how to pray, our Father, which are never our, it's the same idea as he's God, but he's personal. The Lord is my shepherd. For all the words that David could have picked, he picks one that implies deep care, deep concern for my well-being. David himself was a shepherd. He lived 24/7 with his sheep. And the Near Eastern shepherds of that day knew each of their sheep by name and cared for them every single day, slept with them at night in the hot and in the cold. So when David says the Lord is my shepherd, he's not just thinking about someone else out there who happened to mention a shepherd story. He's talking about the vocation he had before he became king, looking after these sheep which tended to go astray. And he says, actually, God looks after me in that same way. The Lord is my shepherd. And because of that, I lack nothing. Now this is a difficult phrase, I lack nothing, because when I look at my life, I've got plenty of lacks. I've got plenty of valleys. If this finger represents my world, there are some mountains and there's a whole lot of gaps as well. But it's as if David is saying, when the shepherding of God is in my life, he fills up the gaps. And if my life is showing signs of great lack, it's generally because I'm not going to the great shepherd. And when I'm going to the great shepherd, he has everything I need, and therefore I lack nothing because I'm with him. In myself, I've got lots of lacks, but God has no lack, and he is my shepherd, and everything I need, he has for me. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. And suddenly the spokes of my wheel start to tension up a little bit, and the center starts to refine itself. He says, secondly, he, this great shepherd, makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. And I've borrowed the first 3 words of the next line. He guides me. When I study the psalm, it stands out to me from this line, the action of God in my world. David said, he makes me, he leads me, he refreshes me, he guides me. The great shepherd doesn't just say, Wimble, you go out and do your best. And when you fall off the bicycle, come back and I've got some balm. No, David says, when I'm following the shepherd, he makes me, he leads me, he refreshes me, and he guides me. And suddenly I feel comfort well up inside of my soul. And suddenly my shoulders feel like they're pulled back a bit. And if God is guiding me into this week and into my year, and if God is leading me, and if He's refreshing me, and if He's making me lie down, my future's secure. Because He's the great shepherd. And God, as your little sheep, I thank you for your work in my world, in making me, leading me, refreshing me, and guiding me. And it's not just a random guidance. It says He, the shepherd, leads me, the sheep, beside still waters. He makes me lie down in green pastures. As far as I am told, sheep do not drink from water that's flowing over down rapids. Sheep only drink from water that's still. And David would have known that as a shepherd. So he says, God leads me to places of quiet. All of this is soul language, incidentally. This doesn't have to do with my external calendar necessarily. It's soul language for saying, God makes me eat the green grass I need, and He makes me drink from quiet waters. And He occasionally makes me lie down. He brings peace in my soul. And then he goes on to talk. He says He also restores my soul. When I take a few batterings and bruisings, God is there to restore the parts of my soul that no human can restore. And as I think about each of these phrases, it's like different spokes of the wheel start to pull in alignment again. I think I'm the most blessed person in the world. I get to be shepherded by God. Earlier in July of this year, I took a slightly longer leave. Jackson and I have been here 7 years. And towards the end of last year, when a little red light started to shine on my dashboard as I stopped looking forward to preaching on Sundays. For about a month, my preparation of messages was very difficult. And it was just my enjoyment. And I said to Jackson, I'm a little concerned. I'm feeling just a little soul tired. And so I took a slightly longer leave. Not wanting to fall off the bicycle, but and the first week of leave, I took an entire solitude, one whole week. Doing some reading, just allowing my brain to slow down, my heart, just to slow down, and allowing the great shepherd to speak words of refreshing into me again. I can't do that every single month, not even every year necessarily, but an entire week of solitude with the shepherd. And suddenly my tank started to feel filled up again. Suddenly some of the joy bubbling over, not just present. He then goes on to say, even though I walk through the darkest valley. So, well, wait a minute. Great shepherd, I like the green grass, quiet water stuff. That's me. I receive all of that. I don't want any darkest valleys. No, thank you. He says, I will, and some versions say the valley of the shadow of death. David says, I will still fear no evil, for you're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Sometimes the over-busyness of our minds is not because of logjam on our calendars, it's because of danger that we feel we're facing. And physically, our adrenal glands are pumping out too much adrenaline that's good for us. And we're living with the sense of danger over deals that need to be done, decisions that need to be made, conflict that needs to be resolved. And this becomes our emotional valleys, dark valleys. And David says, as I look to you, great shepherd, I can walk through those valleys of literal death or of metaphorical danger, and I will fear no evil. I'm not going to live a life of fear because you're with me. And then he says this amazing thing, your rod and staff comfort me. One preacher I heard preaching about this voice, he said, that sounds more like a clap than a comfort. But the beautiful thing about a shepherd's rod is that it was used for walking. It was used for protecting the sheep from all danger, and it was used to count every sheep. Every sheep that went in was tapped and counted by the rod. And every sheep that went out was tapped and counted. And David says, you tap me and you know me. You're counting me. You're protecting me. You're with me. And the shepherd's staff usually had a curved end to it. And that was for retrieving sheep. That was for holding sheep back. And if a sheep or a little lamb fell down the edge of a cliff and landed on a little ledge, that shepherd would be there reaching down and pulling that little sheep back up. And when Steve Wimble falls off the little cliff and gets a little wobbly in my thinking, a little overbusy, and end of a little ledge, the great shepherd reaches down and his staff comforts me, says, come here, my boy. You just come back to the shepherd. And it tensions up the wheel of my life. And it brings soul restoration again. Because the primary relief from an overbusy mind is not more holidays. I'm not speaking against holiday. Rest is good. But it's getting in deeper contact with the Great Shepherd again. And then he finishes off, and I'm going to ask the music team to come up just as I finish off this psalm. He finishes off the last two verses. He says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I don't need to fight, I can feast. You anoint my head with oil. This was what was done to royalty. They were anointed with oil. And David says, you, God, anoint my head with oil. I'm under your blessing. My cup overflows. You guys could come up, Andy, thanks. My cup overflows. I don't live in a scarcity inside in my soul. I don't live in poverty. My cup overflows. And then he finishes off with this truly magnificent ending, verse 6. He says, surely. That's the opposite of possibly. Surely your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life. The shepherd's in front, and his goodness and love is following me every single day of my life. And I'm unsure what tomorrow will bring, and I'm unsure what Tuesday will bring. I'm unsure what Wednesday will bring and Thursday. But his goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. This week, I read in News 24 a horrendous story of a young lady that was murdered in her sleep. And as I read more of the story, I realized, I know this girl. One of my sister's best friends from school. And I messaged my sister, and she told me more of the story. For the next few minutes, my mind started to wobble. I just said, how can stuff like this be? All the violence every single day that happens in our country. We spoke a little about it last week. And just internally, I could feel, I was just getting a bit of a wobble in my soul. I don't know how else to describe it. Just like, and then had to remind myself that this life is the temporary one. And that life is the eternal. And this young lady was saved, to my knowledge, loved Jesus Christ, and will be with him for all eternity. And how she died is tragic from this point of view. But it ushered her into the presence of Jesus. And I start to think these thoughts again, and suddenly the wheel of my life gets tensioned up. I say, oh God, actually, I will live wherever you tell me to live, in any country in the world. Everything you want me to do, I want to obey you because it's your goodness and your love that are with me. I want to follow you to the best of my ability.